The small American flag that fluttered on Michael Donovan's front porch meant everything to him. It wasn't just any flag. It was the same one that had been draped over his brother's coffin when he returned home from Afghanistan. James Donovan, a decorated Marine Corps surgeon, had given his life in Helmand Province during his third tour of duty. The flag was the last physical connection Michael had to his older brother, the hero who had inspired him through childhood and beyond. On that crisp autumn morning in the quiet suburb of Pine Ridge Estates, Michael stepped out onto his porch with his coffee mug in hand, ready for his daily ritual of quiet reflection beneath that sacred flag. But something was wrong. The flag was gone. In its place, pinned to the wall with a garish pink thumbtack, was a homeowners association violation notice. The paper trembled in Michael's shaking hand as he read the typed words. *FLAG removed due to violation of HOA bylaw 23.4. External decorations must be PRE approved. Fine $150. Michael's coffee mug crashed to the ground. His legs nearly gave out as he scanned his property, hoping that perhaps the flag had simply been taken down and left somewhere nearby. But there was nothing. Looking for something. The voice came from across the street, carrying a tone of smug satisfaction that made Michael's blood run cold even before he turned to face its source. Eleanor Winters, the self-appointed neighborhood watchdog and HOA board president, stood on her immaculate lawn with arms crossed. At 58, she ruled Pine Ridge Estates with meticulously polished nails and a comprehensive knowledge of every bylaw she had personally helped draft over the past decade. "My brother's flag," Michael said, his voice barely containing his rage. "Where is it?" Eleanor's thin lips curved into what might generously be called a smile. That ratty old thing? It was faded, torn at the edges, and frankly, bringing down property values. "I removed it myself. That flag is a memorial. It covered my brother's coffin. He died serving this country." Michael stepped toward the property line, clutching the violation notice so tightly it crumpled in his fist. "Rules are rules, Mr. Donovan." Eleanor's voice didn't waver. "You moved into this community knowing our standards. If you wanted to display a flag, you should have submitted the proper paperwork." "Where is it?" Michael repeated, slower this time, each word heavy with barely contained fury. Eleanor's gaze flicked toward her backyard. "Dispose it properly. You can't have tattered flags on display. It's disrespectful." The world seemed to tilt beneath Michael's feet as the implications sank in. "You burned it." "The proper way to dispose of an American flag is through ceremonial burning," Eleanor replied with the practiced tone of someone quoting a manual. "I simply followed protocol." Michael stood frozen, the morning sun suddenly feeling cold on his skin. 20 years of military discipline were all that kept him from crossing that lawn and doing something he would regret. His brother had died for the very freedom this woman was using against him. "My brother was a Marine," Michael finally said, his voice low and dangerous. "He died protecting your right to be this petty. But you made a mistake, Mrs. Winters." Eleanor's self-satisfied expression faltered just slightly. "Threats will be reported to the board," she warned. "It's not a threat," Michael replied, turning back toward his house. "It's a promise. James had friends, brothers in arms who take care of their own, and they won't take kindly to what you've done." As he walked back into his home, Michael pulled out his phone. His hand trembled with rage as he scrolled to a contact he hadn't called in years, Captain Riley Stevens, his brother's former commanding officer. The Marines had a saying, "No man left behind." In Michael's mind, that applied to their memories as well. By nightfall, the quiet story of a burned memorial flag would travel through channels Eleanor Winters couldn't begin to comprehend. The Marines were coming, not with weapons, but with something far more powerful. Purpose. Captain Riley Stevens sat in his office at the Marine Corps base, staring at the phone long after Michael Donovan's call had ended. 22 years in the courts had hardened him against many things, but disrespect toward a fallen brother's memory wasn't one of them. James Donovan had been one of his best, brave to the point of recklessness, loyal to the core, and with a laugh that could lift the spirits of an entire platoon in the darkest moments. "Johnson," Riley called through the open door. Within seconds, Staff Sergeant Kevin Johnson appeared in the doorway, standing at attention. "Sir, round up everyone from Donovan's unit who's still on base. Conference room, 30 minutes. And get Rodriguez on video call. He's stationed in San Diego now." As Johnson hurried away, Riley opened his desk drawer and pulled out a worn photograph. Their unit in Afghanistan, arms slung around each other's shoulders, James Donovan grinning in the center. Riley traced his finger over the image. "We've got your back, brother. Always." Eleanor Winters was having a splendid afternoon. The HOA meeting had gone exactly as planned. 3 new violations issued, a ban on basketball hoops approved, and her proposal for standardized holiday decorations passed unanimously. As she drove her immaculate white Lexus through the neighborhood, she mentally noted 2 more potential violations to address tomorrow. When she turned onto her street, she frowned. A sleek black pickup truck with Marine Corps plates was parked in front of Michael Donovan's house. Worse still, a small crowd had gathered on his lawn. Several men and women, most sporting military haircuts or bearing the unmistakable bearing of veterans. Eleanor pulled into her driveway, lips pursed with disapproval. This wouldn't do at all. Groups exceeding 4 people required an event permit in Pine Ridge Estates. She grabbed her HOA manual and marched across the street. Michael was standing on his porch with a tall, imposing man in marine dress blues. Captain Stevens, though Eleanor didn't know that yet. Around them were 8 other Marines, some in uniform, others in civilian clothes, but with the unmistakable posture that marked them as military. "Excuse me," Eleanor called out, her voice cutting through the conversation. "This gathering violates bylaw 17.2. I'll need to see your event permit." The group turned toward her with a synchronized motion that made Eleanor falter briefly. Their faces weren't hostile, exactly, but they held something far more unnerving, calm, measured purpose. Captain Stevens stepped forward, extending his hand. "Mrs. Winters, I presume? I'm Captain Riley Stevens, United States Marine Corps. These are members of Sergeant James Donovan's unit." Eleanor ignored the outstretched hand. "Military status doesn't exempt anyone from HOA regulations. This gathering is a memorial service," Stevens interrupted smoothly. "We're here to honor one of our fallen brothers and replace the flag that covered his coffin when he returned home." For the first time, Eleanor noticed what Michael was holding, a folded American flag in the traditional triangle, encased in a wooden display box with a glass front. A gleaming plaque on the bottom read, "Sate, James A. Donovan, USMC. Honor, courage, commitment." "That flag can't go up without proper approval," Eleanor insisted, though her voice had lost some of its edge. "There's a process." "Ma'am," a female Marine stepped forward, Major Diana Rodriguez, who had flown in from San Diego that morning. "Perhaps you're unfamiliar with the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act of 2005. It specifically prohibits homeowners associations from restricting members from displaying the U.S. flag on their property." Eleanor blinked rapidly. "Our bylaws clearly state." "Federal laws supersede your bylaws," Rodriguez continued calmly. "Additionally, the Service Members Civil Relief Act provides certain protections against civil actions like arbitrary HOA penalties while service members are deployed or recovering from service." Eleanor's mouth opened and closed without sound. This wasn't how these confrontations usually went. People backed down when she cited bylaws. It didn't come back with federal legislation. "Furthermore," Captain Stevens added, "we've taken the liberty of speaking with your HOA board members this morning. They were surprisingly uninformed about your unilateral decision to remove and burn a veteran's memorial flag." The blood drained from Eleanor's face. "I was following procedure for flag disposal. Without authorization from the owner," Stevens corrected. "That's theft and destruction of personal property, specifically a military memorial item." The board members we spoke with were quite concerned when they learned the full context. The emergency HOA board meeting the following evening was standing room only. Residents who had never attended a single meeting in years packed the community center, standing against walls and spilling out into the hallway. News of Eleanor Winters' flag burning had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire, amplified by local media coverage featuring interviews with Captain Stevens and several other Marines from James Donovan's unit. Eleanor sat rigidly in the front row, her normally perfect posture now seeming brittle rather than commanding. The HOA board members sat at their table on a small raised platform, their expressions ranging from embarrassed to openly hostile as they glanced in her direction. Board President Richard Harrison called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of his gavel. "Before we address the agenda, I believe we need to discuss recent events that have brought unwanted attention to our community." Eleanor raised her hand. "Point of order. This discussion isn't on the approved agenda distributed last week." Richard stared at her coldly. "The board has unanimously approved an emergency amendment to the agenda. Mrs. Winters, given that you're directly involved in this situation, perhaps it would be best if you simply listen for now." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Nobody had ever spoken to Eleanor that way in a meeting before. Richard continued, "Many of you have seen the news. For those who haven't, Mrs. Winters, acting without board authorization or review, removed and destroyed an American flag from the Donovan residence, a flag with significant emotional and historical value as it had covered the coffin of Sergeant James Donovan, who was killed in action serving our country." The room grew deathly quiet. "The board has received formal complaints from multiple residents, the veterans of foreign wars, the American Legion, and the office of our congressional representative. We've also been notified of pending legal action." Richard adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Donovan, would you like to address the community?" Michael stood up from his seat near the back, accompanied by Captain Stevens and Major Rodriguez. He carried a small stack of papers. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison." Michael's voice was steady as he addressed the room. "I'm not here to vilify anyone. I simply want to share something with all of you." He held up a photograph, a young Marine in dress blues, smiling broadly. "This is my brother James. He served 3 tours in Afghanistan. On his last tour, his unit was ambushed while delivering medical supplies to a village. James got his wounded men to safety before he was hit." Michael's voice wavered slightly. The flag Mrs. Winters burned was draped over his coffin, linking home for the last time. It was presented to me by his commanding officer at his funeral. A woman in the second row openly sobbed. Someone else muttered, "Disgraceful." Eleanor's face had gone from pale to ashen. "I didn't know." "You didn't ask," Michael replied simply. "You saw a violation, not a person with a story." Captain Stevens stepped forward. "We've prepared something for the board and community to consider." He handed a document to Richard Harrison. "This is a proposed amendment to your HOA bylaws that would bring them into compliance with federal laws protecting the right to display the American flag, as well as adding specific protections for military families and veterans in your community." Major Rodriguez added, "We've also drafted a military courtesy addendum that many other communities across the country have adopted. It recognizes the sacrifices of service members and their families with simple accommodations." Richard reviewed the documents, then passed them to the other board members. "These look very reasonable. I move we put them to an immediate vote." Another board member nodded. "Seconded." Eleanor shot to her feet. "This is completely irregular. New bylaws require review periods, committee analysis, impact assessments, all of which can be waived by unanimous board vote in situations requiring immediate action," Richard countered. "Something you've done yourself 17 times in the past 5 years, according to our records." The color drained from Eleanor's face as she sank back into her chair. The vote was quick and decisive. The new amendments passed unanimously with thunderous applause from the gathered residents. But Richard wasn't finished. There's one more matter to address. Mrs. Winters' actions have exposed this community to significant legal liability and brought negative publicity that could affect property values, ironically, the very thing she claimed to be protecting by removing Mr. Donovan's flag. The Pine Ridge Estates community underwent a remarkable transformation in the weeks following the emergency HOA meeting. The newly formed Neighborhood Relations Committee, led by retired Judge Patricia Coleman, had been systematically reviewing every violation Eleanor Winters had issued over the past 2 years. The results were staggering. Over 70% of citations were either improperly issued, selectively enforced, or based on bylaws that conflicted with state or federal regulations. On a bright Saturday morning, Michael Donovan stood on his front porch, coffee in hand, admiring the new flagpole that now stood proudly in his front yard. The replacement flag Captain Stevens and the Marines had brought fluttered in the gentle breeze. Below it flew a smaller Marine Corps flag bearing the eagle, globe, and anchor. Both were illuminated at night by a small, tasteful spotlight, all officially approved by the new HOA board. "Looks good," came a voice from the sidewalk. Michael turned to see Captain Stevens approaching in civilian clothes, carrying a small box under his arm. "Morning, Riley," Michael greeted him. "Didn't expect to see you today." Stevens climbed the steps to the porch. "Had some news I wanted to deliver in person." He glanced at the flagpole. "Your brother would have approved." "Coffee," Michael offered. "Please." Inside, as Michael poured his second cup, Stevens set the box on the kitchen table. The guys in James's unit pulled together. "We found these in storage at the base." Michael opened the box carefully. Inside were photographs, letters, and a small, worn notebook with Donovan written on the cover in faded ink. His breath caught in his throat. "James's field journal," Stevens explained. "He kept notes, thoughts, some pretty terrible jokes, too. We thought you should have it." Michael ran his fingers over his brother's handwriting, emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "Thank you. This means everything." Stevens nodded, understanding without words. "There's something else. The story about what happened here. With the flag, the HOA, it went viral in military circles. The Marine Corps Times picked it up, then Stars and Stripes. Now it's spreading." Michael looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" "Communities across the country are reviewing their HOA regulations regarding flags and veterans' rights. 3 state legislatures have introduced bills specifically prohibiting HOAs from restricting military memorial displays." Stevens smiled slightly. "They're calling it Donovan's Law in the drafts." Michael sat heavily in his chair. James would have found that hilarious. He hated paperwork and regulations. "Yeah, but he loved making a difference." Stevens sipped his coffee. "Which brings me to my next bit of news. Eleanor Winters." "Haven't seen her in weeks," Michael interrupted. "Rumor has it she's selling her house." "She is," Stevens confirmed. But before she goes, she's agreed to make amends. Michael's eyebrows shot up. Seriously, how? The legal pressure was part of it. The class action lawsuit from residents was gaining traction. But something else happened. Stevens leaned forward. Her son reached out to us. Turns out he's Air Force stationed overseas when he heard what his mother had done. Ouch, Michael winced. Yeah, apparently they had a very long, very difficult conversation. He explained some hard truths about what the flag means to those who serve. Stevens checked his watch. She should be here within the hour. I'll be gone by then. This is between you two, but I wanted you to be prepared. After Stevens left, Michael sat in his living room, staring at James' journal without opening it. He wasn't sure how to feel about facing Eleanor again. The anger had subsided, replaced by something more complex, a mixture of sadness for the kind of person who would burn a memorial flag and satisfaction that justice had been served. The doorbell rang at exactly 11 a.m. Eleanor Winters stood on his porch, looking nothing like the imperious HOA enforcer who had smugly admitted to burning his flag weeks earlier. Her perfect coiffure was replaced by a simpler style, her designer outfit by casual slacks and a simple blouse. Most noticeably, the arrogant posture was gone. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. "Mr. Donovan," she said quietly, "thank you for agreeing to see me." Michael hadn't agreed to anything, but he nodded and stepped aside to let her enter. Eleanor remained standing in his living room, clutching her purse with both hands. "I've come to apologize," she said stiffly, as if the words were foreign to her. "What I did was inexcusable." Michael said nothing, waiting. "My son." Her voice cracked slightly. "My son Ryan helped me understand what that flag meant. He's Air Force, stationed in Germany." She pulled out her phone, hands trembling. 1 year later, Pine Ridge Estates was unrecognizable from the rigid, rule-bound community it had once been. The neighborhood had bloomed not just with flags of all kinds, American flags, service flags, ancestral homeland flags, but with a vibrant community spirit that had been suppressed under Eleanor Winters' reign. The anniversary of the flag-burning incident coincided with Veterans Day, and the neighborhood had unanimously decided to mark the occasion with their first annual Veterans Appreciation Day. The Central Park area of Pine Ridge Estates, once restricted to passive recreation only under Eleanor's interpretation of the bylaws, was now filled with residents, food trucks, and a stage where a local band played patriotic music. Michael Donovan stood near the newly installed memorial garden, watching as children played freely on the grass while adults chatted in groups around picnic tables. The garden featured a central flagpole surrounded by stones bearing the names of veterans connected to community members. James Donovan's stone held the place of honor, alongside Mr. Bergman's comrades from the Yom Kippur War and dozens of others. "Quite a change from last year," Richard Harrison commented, joining Michael with a paper plate of barbecue. Michael nodded. James would have loved this. He was always the first one planning the unit parties. "The Donovan Memorial Garden is officially the most popular spot in the neighborhood," Richard added. "The kid's history teacher brings classes here for lessons about service and sacrifice. And to think it all started with one burned flag," Michael said quietly. "And ended with the community finding its conscience," Richard replied. "By the way, have you checked your email today? There's big news." Michael raised an eyebrow. "What kind of news?" "The governor signed it this morning. Donovan's law is officially on the books. No HOA in the state can prohibit the display of American flags or military service memorials on private property. 3 other states have already followed suit." Before Michael could respond, Captain Stevens approached with several Marines in dress blues, all members of James' former unit. Behind them came a surprise, a tall Air Force officer whom Michael didn't recognize. "Michael," Stevens greeted him, "there's someone who wanted to meet you." The Air Force officer stepped forward, extending his hand. "Captain Ryan Winters, sir. I believe you know my mother." Michael blinked in surprise as he shook the man's hand. "I didn't know you were in town." Ryan smiled. "Just got back stateside last week. I've been following everything that happened here. I wanted to thank you in person." "Thank me? For what?" "For how you've handled things with my mother." Ryan's expression grew serious. "She's changed, you know. Started volunteering at the VA hospital in her new town. Calls me regularly to ask about my service buddies, sends care packages to my unit. She can help establish a military family support group in her new community." Michael was speechless for a moment. "I'm glad to hear that. She told me about your conversation, about your brother saying how you recover from mistakes shows more character than never making one." Ryan's voice was earnest. "That's affected her deeply. She's trying to make amends in her own way." As if on cue, Michael's phone buzzed with a text message. It was a photo from an unfamiliar number. Eleanor Winters standing beside a group of elderly veterans at what appeared to be a VA facility. The caption read, "Thought James might approve. Thank you for the second chance." The ceremony began shortly after, with the community gathering around the memorial garden. Michael had been asked to speak, though public speaking had never been his forte. Standing at the podium, looking out at the faces of neighbors who had become friends and allies, he felt James' presence more strongly than ever. "A year ago, I stood on my porch and discovered that something precious had been taken from me," Michael began. "I was angry. I wanted justice. What I got instead was something far more valuable, a community." He gestured to the Marines standing at attention near the garden. "These men and women taught me that while we fight to defend our individual rights, we live for something bigger. The connections between us." James knew that. He died protecting his brothers and sisters in arms. Michael unfolded a piece of paper. "I'd like to read something from my brother's journal. He wrote this 3 weeks before he died. Sometimes I wonder if people back home understand what we're really fighting for. It's not just about the flag, though I love what it stands for. It's about the promise that we can disagree and still respect each other. That we can be different and still be neighbors. That's the America worth dying for. Not the perfect one, but the one that keeps trying to be better." A hush fell over the crowd as Michael,